Thank you, Rebecca. So, Kathy, as Vice President of CASI, that's the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants, came back from an Executive Directors Forum last year and said, we need to have Carl Flecker speak at our immigration forum. And here he is. Carl Flecker is the National Director of the Anti-Racism and the Human Rights Department for the Canadian Labour Congress. He has a strong background in adult education and training, as well as considerable experience working with equity-seeking groups. Carl has written numerous articles on trade agreements, migration policy, workers' rights, and equity issues. He has worked with the Policy Research and Action Organization like the Polaris Institute based in Canada, and worked internationally with community, union, and social justice groups in South Africa, India, Asia, and the Americas, who are creatively addressing the challenges that are impacting workers and community rights. And I have to tell you, he was a hard man to find and a hard guy to keep up with, and I was kind of panicked yesterday. And then I phoned the hotel and they're like, oh yeah, he's going down the hall, give him a chance to get to his room. I'm like, I just wanted to know that he got here. So without further ado, Mr. Carl Flecker.
Hi folks, how's everybody doing this morning? Every time I hear that bio introduction, I'm reminded to change it. That line in there about working internationally, creatively addressing community struggles, that means I've been arrested in a number of countries and I can't go back. So I really want to thank Michelle and Kathy, the organizers, for the invitation to speak with you today. And I'm also curious to get a sense of who's in the room. So bear with me here, just by show of hands. Who's here from the immigration and settlement sector? Okay. And keep your hands up so others can see. Okay, who's here from the business community? Oh, somebody. Okay. Who's here from city council?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. How many newcomers have we got in the room? Okay. Okay. Any media? How about university students? Okay. Nice to see you. That was supposed to be directed at my daughter, who said that she might show up, but she also had an exam today, so to see which one is the priority. I want to thank you really for coming to the forum, and big props to each of you for your interest in the topic of embracing change, and particularly on the challenging and rewarding task of welcoming newcomers to Thunder Bay. What we're talking about here is integration, community integration, and that's a two-way street. Newcomers want to contribute their skills and experience and make communities like Thunder Bay their home. And in return, Canadian communities benefit from that international talent. But right now I want to share with you a few 30-second public service announcements, TV spots that were produced by the Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council and Hire Immigrant CA. And I like these particular TV spots because I think they set some important context on the theme of embracing change and some of the challenges that we collectively face. So, with that.
Look, your company has not achieved post-acquisition economies of scale. Cash is king, and yours is still lacking assets to depreciate value. So, you must liquidate slow-moving inventory and apply for R&D grants.
So this says you went to Tehran University?
Tehran University, yes, I did.
Okay, and you graduated with a master's degree.
Master's in mechanical engineering.
Right. And then you were a senior engineer at Barami and Maga?
Moghada.
Well, this is a great resume.
Thank you.
So can you work a software machine? I've had the worst pain in the back of my thigh for days.
You may have sciatica. Call a lumbar spine MRI to rule out disc herniation, space-occupying lesion, or degenerative disc disease. Of course, you may have deep vein thrombosis, in which case you should have a Doppler ultrasound done.
I should be a doctor.
If I could use the light signal for that. So, tell me, did you enjoy those spots? Have people seen them before? No. Okay. Got a couple of questions for you. What are the concerns that the newcomers are expressing in those TV spots? Just shout out your answers. Nice and loud. We can't hear you. Sorry.
The mic's not synced.
Is this better? Can you hear me now? Great. So what are the concerns that the newcomers are expressing in those TV spots?
They're not working.
They're not being recognized.
We'll go back here. Go ahead.
They're not being recognized.
Not being recognized.
They're not working in their field.
Not working in their field.
Underemployed.
See if they can turn
Sorry?
it down a little bit.
Underemployed, underutilized. Okay. What features are you seeing common about the newcomers that are portrayed in those TV spots?
I think they're more passive.
So, say again?
It seems to be that they're more passive.
More captive?
Passive. Passive.
Okay, passive, okay. What else do you notice? What do you notice physically, ethnoculturally?
They're all visible minorities.
Racialized, visible minorities, okay? Strong accents, okay? Their place of origin, where do they come from? What do you notice about how they were treated by prospective employers, by consumers, by colleagues in the workplace? The messenger, when he wanted to move forward. No value. Okay. It was a class thing. It was a hierarchy. You're just the messenger. Okay. And there was discomfort, wasn't there? Do you think that TV spots like this would help to promote a debate in the community about what's happening with immigrants? For those of you who are involved in this issue, how difficult is it to raise this discussion with your friends, your colleagues, your neighbors? And what this TV spot does in 29 seconds, what does it do? What issues does come to your mind when you see it? Makes you think. Okay. A little bit later, I want to come back to another message that I think is within these TV spots, is what's been happening with our federal immigration policy. How has that been changing over the last number of years that make these issues front and center? And I brought a few critiques, papers that we've recently put out at the CLC, for example, on changes to the Foreign Skilled Worker Program that I hope will be of interest to you, and maybe we'll be able to get into a discussion later. I'll leave them here. They're also available online. But right now, what I want to put on the table is the embracing change topic in the context of demographic change. And I recognize that talking about demographics can be a bit dry. And I want to paraphrase a fellow by the name of John Kenneth Galbraith, who spoke on equally stimulating topics, economics for one. And he noted that talking about topics like this, economics or demographics, it's not only dry, it's not as stimulating as many people think. Actually, my wife and kids make that very plain to me when I ask them to listen to my presentations, and they go, "No, please, Dad, thank you." Anyway, what John Kenneth Galbraith, he put it less eloquently. He said that talking about demographics is a little bit like having the unfortunate experience of peeing down your leg. It feels hot to you, but not so much for others. But anyway, who knows, maybe at the end of this presentation I'll be getting you to check your pant legs. Let's get a sense of the demographics in this room. by show of hands again, and keep them up in the air for a second or two and look around so you can see what the demographic canvas of this room looks like. These are age date labels. These are demographic breakdowns of when you were born. How many in the room would categorize themselves as matures based on this age of birth? Okay, couple. That's wisdom there. Don't be shy about putting it in. How many in the room are boomers? Okay, take a look around, see how the room tilts. How many of you are Gen Xers? Okay, decent number. How many Gen Ys? Wow. Okay, haven't seen that in a while. Okay, now, a few more questions. How many of you are looking to retire in the next 10 years? And the speed by which those hands go up? Take a look. How many of you have got children? Wow. How many of your children are working? They've got jobs. Okay. And are they good paying jobs? Some. Notice the hands are a bit hesitant here now. By the way, do you know what the average age is for kids to leave home? Truly leave home? 34 years. They go, they come back, they come for just a laundry. How many of you have got children or grandchildren that are newcomers? One, two? How many of you have got children or grandchildren that are racialized? Children that are Aboriginal? Okay. How about children that are hybrids? Okay. Meaning they're biracial or multiracial. How many of you got children that are disabled, living with disabilities? How many have got children who are LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, members of those communities? Okay. How many of you have noticed when you, remember when you used to bring home that photograph, the kids would bring home the photograph of their school class? How many have noticed that that photograph over time has been changing? How has it been changing?
I've noticed that the classrooms have actually been getting a lot smaller, so there's a lot less kids in the classroom.
Less kids? What else have you noticed in the picture?
I've noticed a diversity of ethnicity, which is great.
Okay, great. I remember when I brought home that picture, it was a black and white picture. Well, mostly it was just a white picture, actually, where I grew up. But then over time, it became actually a colorful picture. We were the first family of color that moved into Orangeville, Ontario in the 1960s. My dad was the principal of the school, and my mom was my school teacher, and that has left a lasting scar. How many of you have noticed your workplace changing in terms of that diversity? Okay. Again, same sort of thing that you're seeing in the classroom?
Yeah, definitely a wide range.
Okay. Here's an interesting stat. Gen Y, 1 out of 3 kids ain't white. Okay. Most racially diverse cohort in Canadian history. Now, how many of you have got ancestral roots from Britain, France, somewhere in Europe? Hands up high. Take note. How many of you were born outside of Canada? Take note. How many of you were born in Asia? Africa? The Americas? The Pacific region? Did you notice what took place there? How many of you would consider yourself a person of color, Aboriginal, or hybrid? 1. Okay. How many of you are living with disabilities? Take a look at the person next to you. Here's another interesting stat. Within the next 10 years, one of the 2 of you will be afflicted by disability. That is how our community workplace is changing. How many of you are 30 years of age or younger, biologically? And you're shy. You're really shy. Put your hands up slowly. Okay, so there's some pretty interesting diversity in this room. Why have I asked those questions? Do you ever wonder what the picture of diversity looks like in Canadian labor force? Do you ever wonder what the Canadian labor force actually looks like with those kinds of questions? Probably not. You probably have more interesting lives than I do. This is the Canadian labor force. Take a close look at the breakdown of those numbers and look at the cumulative total. Just under 80% of 17 million workers in this country are from equity-seeking groups. That's pretty astounding. Now, each of these groups is growing in size, and of course, an individual can occupy more than one of these identities, and they're just cumulative totals, they're not disaggregated. Remember, 17 million in the workforce, about 35 million in the country.
What's PWD?
Persons with disability.
Oh,
Thanks for asking.
and I've never seen the term racialized.
Racialized. Canadian government uses the term visible minority, but about 20% of the population are people of color, and that number is growing. So visible minority seems to be a numerical inaccuracy, right? They're not really a minority, they're actually well on their way to becoming a majority. Okay. And racialized meaning to be very specific about the terms and conditions of your biology that make your class and economic status different. Okay? There's a political undertone in the use of the term. Let me ask this question. How do you think newcomers fit into this picture? Today, we're 80% dependent on annual immigration flows for net labor force growth. 80% dependent today. In 48 months, we become 100% dependent on newcomers to the country for net labor force growth. That's significant, and that's around the corner. That's faster than many of us will pay off the lease on our next car. Now, immigrants make up 30% of Ontario's current labor force. And by 2030, at the latest, we become solely dependent on immigration just to grow our population. So it doesn't matter how much Viagra is actually sold in the country. We're not replacing our population. The child-to-mother ratio to replace the population is 2.1. Ours is 1.6. We're on the way up. 35 million. We're going to cap out at that population level by 2017 when this country celebrates its 150th birthday. And then we start to decline. Right now, the number of people who come in under the immigration flows after the end of this short talk will mean that we will end up with a net gain of about one, maybe two small minivans worth of folks in the population. When you count the people who are leaving the mortal coil, the birth rate, and the net immigration flows. Anybody been to Liechtenstein? Somebody's been there? What's it like in downtown Liechtenstein these days? Well, I read something interesting by Doug Sanders, because they too have an aging population and a low fertility rate, and a very, very low immigration intake. So downtown Liechtenstein is actually being viewed by some filmmakers as places to make apocalyptic films where the Earth's population has diminished and fields and major markets are overgrown, kind of like that TV series Revolution, and Wrigley Field is overgrown because they don't have people anymore. That's the road that Canada is on. So newcomers are a major component to grow the labor force and to grow our population. And they're going to add their diversity to our diversity. Now, Census Canada reported on the linguistic characteristics of Canadians, and they pointed out recently just how much this country is changing. We now have over 200 languages as home languages or mother tongues. Nearly 20% of Canadians now speak at least 2 languages at home, and since 2006, nearly 1 million Canadians now report speaking a language other than English or French. We're not just a bilingual nation anymore. We're a multilingual nation. bar chart just shows how our population has depended on immigration over time. The blue part of the bars represent immigration. The purple or mauve part represent population by fertility. And that's, the first part was back in 1976, and then it projects forward into 2050. And you can see just how that blue chunk of the bar grows. That's the role that immigration is playing in terms of growing our population. Coming to Canada is the preferred destination for newcomers. And according to a 2012 Gallup poll, international Gallup poll, Canada placed third most popular destination for newcomers, which is interesting because there was a previous Gallup poll, I think in 2010, 09 or 10, and at that point Canada placed second. That's an interesting drop in terms of popularity, and maybe we can come back to why that has happened in terms of our federal immigration policy. What messages have we been sending to newcomers about how cool it is to be in Canada? So let me ask you this question. Who are these newcomers? Where do they come from? What do they bring? %80 of approximately the 250,000 newcomers who are coming under the permanent residency program. And let me ask you to close your eyes here. And I want you to imagine the faces and the religions that dominate in these source countries. Because this is where our immigration flows come from. Asia, Pacific region, Africa, the Middle East, or the Americas. What color, what religion do you imagine these new Canadians carry with them? Tell me. What color do you see? Brown. Black. What religion?
Muslim?
Muslim. Christian, Muslim, Christian.
Buddhist.
And Buddhist, Sikhs,
Hindu.
Hindu. Thank you. Okay. Well, take a look at this. This is a really disturbing poll that was conducted by Maclean's magazine in 2009. And it revealed that while nearly 75% of Canadians have a generally favorable opinion of Christianity, they really don't hold Islam in high regard, nor Sikhs or Hindus. When the respondents were asked what they thought that the mainstream beliefs of the major religions, whether the mainstream beliefs of the major religions encourage violence or are mostly peaceful, only 10% said Christianity taught violence. On the other hand, 45% said Islam stood for violence and hatred. Stood for violence and hatred. And nearly 26% viewed Sikhism as promoting violence. A little while ago, I was reading Dan Brown. You know Dan Brown, the novelist? That made that movie with Tom Hanks in it. I forget the name of it. What's it called?
Da Vinci Code.
Da Vinci Code, right. Well, he got another book out called The Lost Symbol. And he has a great line in it that I wanted to share. Those responses by Canadians is pretty ironic, because on the pagan day of the sun god Ra, it's the Christians who kneel at the foot of an ancient instrument of torture and consume ritualistic symbols of blood and flesh. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that's a tad violent. Now, showing how deep anti-Semitism runs, 44% of respondents said they would not want their children to marry a person of the Jewish faith. Even fewer said that they would be comfortable with their children marrying a Sikh or a Muslim. 62% of Canadians said that they oppose changes to laws to accommodate new ethnic immigrant groups and minorities. Is that what this country has become? Does this surprise you? Does this shock you? Are these stats disturbing? Remember when I was asking you about how many of you are living with racialized kids, multiracial, biracial? It's quite likely that your kids, like my kids, because my partner is white, our kids are going to shack up with somebody from another ethnocultural group when you take a look at these numbers. So the likelihood of you getting invited to that wedding in North Bay or Dubai is 50-50. Now, perhaps this national disconnect is not prevalent in Thunder Bay, but the data suggests that communities have a critical role to play in confronting the very disturbing and discriminatory attitudes that persist, that face newcomers, and that face us. Now, many newcomers make Ontario their home, 42% in 2009. Immigrants, as I said, make up 30% of Ontario's labor force. Ontario receives just shy of 60% of all the refugees that come to Canada. 70% of all newcomers already speak English. Almost 5% can talk with you in either official language. And the remaining quarter bring a host of other language skills with them. Nearly 90% of those planning to work here have post-secondary education, diplomas, and/or trade certificates. Newcomers to Canada bring with them a level of education that exceeds the general population. These cats are educated, really educated. And in a world, in a globalized economy that is no longer dependent on being resource extractors, being hewers of wood and drawers of water, where the knowledge-based industries are our future, having bright people with international connections, that's got to be a cool thing for our economy. 51% of immigrants, university degrees versus 20% of Canadian-born. Immigrants now account for close to half of all those in Canada who hold a PhD, and 40% of those who have a master's degree. Which leads to the question, do we acknowledge and value newcomers' extensive education and their diverse work experiences? Recent regulatory changes to the Foreign Skilled Worker Program have changed the point system. Minister Kenney has said, you get points, more points, if you have Canadian experience, and you will be punished if you have international experience. We're turning our backs on international workers. What part of that formula contributes to jobs, growth, and prosperity? The tagline for the Economic Action Plan. As I said, I don't think we're doing a very good job on this front. The Conference Board of Canada estimates that by not recognizing international credentials and skills, it costs us $4.1 to $5.9 billion every year. $4.1 to $5.9 billion. Now, I grappled with that number billion because I make a decent wage, but I couldn't get my head around what $1 billion was. So, being an Indo, I had to turn to my calculator. To make $1 billion, I only need to get a job that will pay me $25 an hour, which is a decent wage. No? Okay, I mean, it's $3 higher than the average wage in Canada. It's a decent wage. I'm in a union. I get a decent wage. So I'll only need to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, for 4,666 years to make $1 billion. Now, odds are I'm dead. This is some serious coin that we are not putting on the table. We're actually wiping it off the table. What part of that fits with jobs, growth, and prosperity? In 2011, Ontario's unemployment rate for very recent immigrants was the second highest in the country and double Ontario's overall rate of employment. The cost is staggering and has intergenerational impacts. Stats Canada reports that since the start of the 21st century, Not only are immigrants more educated upon arrival than earlier waves, they're also more educated than those born here. And in addition, since 2006, newcomers invest in acquiring yet more post-secondary education here. They obtain the highest degrees Canada offers. The children of newcomers, despite cultural, linguistic, and financial challenges, outperform their native-born peers. They achieve higher scores on the standardized math and science tests, which we might take issue with on another day. But they're more likely also to go on to post-secondary education. Wow. And we're wiping that all off the table. How long do you think that second generation of bright newcomers will stick around here? Because often those folks, like myself, our families have taken us back to our home countries as we grew up. So I know my way around Delhi. I know my way around Mumbai. I know my way around Chennai. What are the economies that are growing in this country, in this world? The BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China. What economies are going down the toilet? You know which countries. If you were a young newcomer and you watched your parent end up in a job like those short bids, and they came here for a better country, and you took a look at what's facing you here, and you went back home every couple of years and you saw this booming economy. HSBC Bank has got these great ads, you know, the taxi driver there, you know, who wants to leave. Where do you think they're going to go? A StatsCan study took a look at 18 to 44-year-old men in a short 2-year period, find out how long many of them stay. 6 out of 10 left the country after 2 years. 6 out of 10. Can you hear the sound of the toilet flushing? This might be the depressing part. I want to come back to demographics for a moment. And I want to put this incredible human capital that newcomers bring to our aging population and low fertility rate context. These are population pyramids. One is the one that looks more like a pyramid is going back to the late 80s, and the one on the side that looks like a Return of the Blob is 2005. Now, demographers say that typically population pyramids resemble contented beer drinkers. The bulge is in the middle. When I asked you to raise your hand how many of you were boomers, matures, no offense, but the bulge was there. Our picture isn't good. Our bulge is carried around our ankles as boomers retire and outlive their predecessors. Now, aging populations is big news. There's some headlines recently from the Globe and Mail. I'm sure you've been seeing these things. It's a huge budget issue. What are we going to do? It's so big, in fact, that in November 2011, Human Resources Skills Development Canada prepared a report titled, very catchy title, in case anybody of you is having difficulty sleeping. 2 or 3 pages of this will take care of that. Canada's changing demographics, impacts on population aging, with a coordinating committee of deputy ministers. Can you take note of the word that's in there on that cover page? It's marked secret by the Government of Canada. What is so secret about getting old? Is that not worrying? I had to file an access to information request to get this document. And many of the pages were redacted, they were blanked out. Really? Now, demographics in the country are changing, and the drama is really significant. What's changing? Well, we're getting old. My daughter reminds me of that every time I see her. We've got 2 major waves of elders. First wave are those folks who are 65 years of age and older. That's conservatively 4.3 million people. Wave 2, people who are between the ages of 55 and 64, that's 3.7 million. 3.7 plus 4.3. What's that add up to? 8. 8 million people. How many people in the workforce? 17 million. In less than 10 years, people, 8 million people can step off the work wheel. That's never happened before. That is dramatic. Now, of course, some of those elders are working longer, and I suspect that's because they love their jobs. Or because their kids have moved back home. Or their pension went down the toilet. But you can't fight this.
Yeah, what does that HRSDC stand for?
Yeah, Human Resources Skills Development Canada. Okay, Minister Diane Finley Shaw. HRSDC, Human Resources Skills Development Canada, says that 70% of job openings are going to be attributed to retirements by 2017. Wow. Now that's bonus news for the Gen Ys in the room, if they haven't gone back to India, China, Russia, Brazil. I think this demographic picture should make it very clear. Newcomers are beyond just critical to our economy. They're essential for our population growth. They're essential for your health and your future. Those people who put up their hands and said they wanted their pension, in order for your pension to take care of you, you need a vibrant economy, because that's what drives your pension. And here's another reality, and I don't want this to happen to anyone, but there may be for some of you that day when you get up and try and put on your pants or your skirt, and you stumble and you fall, and you bust your hip, and you reach for the button to be able to call the ambulance. And hopefully it's a public ambulance, and it's going to take you on a publicly maintained road to a public sector hospital where there's going to be some internationally trained healthcare workers who are going to put your hip back in order. Likely, each and every one of those people on that rotten day is going to be a newcomer. I'm betting you want to have a good relationship with them now. So what are our communities doing to reach out to newcomers, given this looming demographic shift? Let me share with you a few things that the labor movement's doing. One of our unions, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, they apprentice electricians. And Barry Stevens, who was one of their staffers there, is now retired, opening up a job for a newcomer. They noted that they were getting a lot of newcomers from China who were inquiring about jobs. And these were, by and large, all highly credentialed electrical engineers, so way beyond electricians. But they were all saying the same story that I showed you in those 29-second video clips. Employers were not recognizing their skills. Their credentials were not getting them into the job market. And IBEW looked at this, and they looked at their union hall, they looked at their members, and they saw a very similar picture to what I asked you. Declining workforce, an aging workforce. You know, many of the union members are on their way out. And they said, these are going to be our new members. We don't have any clue about them. They decided to offer a training course as part of their apprenticeship initiative. So Chinese electrical engineers took night courses and weekend courses. And IBEW had to structure these courses at different timetables. Because of course these electrical engineers all had jobs in the precarious sector in order to make a living. So the only time they could come was evenings and weekends. And what they did in these courses is they learned the electrical code. They learned the vocabulary of the trade. And they learned how to do work in their sector as electricians. The unions got them jobs in hiring halls. And although they were not working at the level of their academic training, they were working in a sector at rates of pay much better than the service sector and precarious work that they were eking a living out, and that was eating their souls. not a perfect fix, not by a long shot, but it's one small measure to, at a minimum, put newcomers into at least their sector of expertise. It also means that we, the labor movement, are deepening our understanding of the immigration system. We're putting union members into direct exchange and support with new Canadians. It's helping us to see what's working and what's not working with our federal immigration policies. And we've become policy advocates as a result of it. Unions like the United Food and Commercial Workers, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, they're also making connections with newcomer communities around issues that matter to them. You guys read that okay? I got a few slides. Now this has meant that we connected cultural events on foreign policy issues such as the war that took place in Sri Lanka. That was essentially a genocide. It's meant making connections around the reparations issue for the internment of the Japanese. It's about seeking justice and apologies for the ancestors of those who suffered under the Chinese Exclusion Act. We're connecting with newcomers in the workplace, at cultural centers, at places of worship, in order both to grow our movement, but also to share our knowledge of the Canadian workplace, its challenges, its struggles, and the need for policy reform. And mostly we're learning an incredible amount from the newcomer communities. From a union activist point of view, when the Sri Lankan community, and there are about 300,000 Sri Lankans in Canada, when that horrible situation was taking place in Sri Lanka, it was the Sri Lankans in Toronto and Ottawa that shut down Parliament and Queen's Park and an arterial highway, the 401 and the Queen's Park. They shut it down with strollers and cell phones. The labor movement hasn't done something like that in quite some time. So we clearly have something to learn about people who are passionate about policies and about their lives and their families. It strikes me that when local communities reach out to newcomers on their terms, we learn a great deal. Can I share another story with you? Are you still with me? Yeah. It's always good when people have not left the room. I told my daughter that that doesn't happen. So United Food and Commercial Workers had a plant in Quebec, and the employer there was a kill and hog plant, processing meats. And the employer said, we're going to slash your wages and slash your benefits. And the workers at the Quebec plant said, no, we're not going to accept that. So the employer said, yeah, we're going to do that. Said, no, we're going to accept it. 1,200 workers got laid off. Ollie Mills said, we're going to open up our operations in Red Deer, Alberta. We're going to just move the work from one part of the country to another. And they came to the union and they said, oh, and by the way, we're applying to Canada's Temporary Foreign Worker Program. And we're bringing in 600 workers from Central America to do what the workers in Quebec used to do, but wouldn't accept lower wages. So the Guatemalans and the Ecuadorians and the Mexicans, they will accept lower wages. So they're going to come in the plant and they're going to do it alongside you guys. So Albert Johnson is the head of the union. And he is a stereotypical guy from, southwestern Alberta. Pickup truck, shotgun hanging from the window, hat, boots, the whole garb. And Albert turns to the employer and says, no, you're not doing that. In fact, we're going to open up the collective agreement. Now, in my time in the Canadian labor movement, I have never met a labor leader who's decided to open up a collective agreement before its dead date. It's political suicide. So Albert Johnson opens up the collective agreement and the employer goes, sure, great opportunity for us to be able to get more concessions. But first, here's the deal. You're going to agree to put all of those workers into the collective agreement at union scale. You're going to agree to book off 6 workers from the plant floor. We're going to do community integration to help those newcomers fit into Red Deer. You're going to provide English as a second language class, paid in the workforce, to be able to teach English to folks, and occupational health and safety. Because a kill and hog plant is a dangerous place. And you're going to pay for all of the administrative costs and processing for any one of those workers and their families who want to access the provincial nominee program and become a permanent citizen of Canada. Wow. Have you heard that story? That's pretty impressive. Hundreds of those temporary foreign workers have acquired Canadian citizenship as a result of that one single measure by one union leader in one plant. Other unions are taking note of that. They're looking at the negotiating strategy, they're looking at the collective agreement language, they're saying, we need to do this. I asked Albert, I said, Albert, you just don't fit my stereotype, you know, of a cigarette-smoking, shotgun-carrying cowboy in Alberta who would actually go out of his way to help newcomers. He goes, yeah, I've been doing it, a union leader for a lot of years. I always see the same 10 people at the union hall meeting. And, you know, there's apathy. He goes, it's very clear that if I didn't do something, we were dead in the water. I said, so that's why you did it? He goes, I had to rebuild the movement. That's what we do. That's our job. I said, well, how's it going now? And he goes, it's amazing. I've got an executive full of people from all over South and Central America. I have no clue what's going on because it's all in Spanish. So communities can make a difference by taking the time to better understand newcomers. What are the skill sets that they bring and want to share with our communities? Consider another possibility. At least the Federation of Canadian Municipalities say that we need to spend a minimum of $124 billion urgently in order to fix our crumbling water systems, mass transportation, community, recreational, cultural, and social infrastructure. If you were to think of our infrastructure in this country as having a lifespan of 100 years, we're at 82 years. Okay. People recall bridges falling on people in Hyundais in Quebec. Ontario is near the front of the line for many of these much-needed investments. At the same time, we've got a huge cohort of underutilized talent with international training and skills, many who are really familiar with the business of building bridges, transport systems, social and cultural infrastructure in some of the most densely populated places in the world. And ironically, they came here to build a new life and contribute to building a nation. Yet as we saw in the vid clips, too often newcomers are driving cabs, working as couriers, or cleaning buildings. We can do better. We have to do better. Simply by investing strategically in people, simply by investing in newcomers who have something, who come here to build something. Let's consider our options. For every $1 billion that we spend on tax cuts, 5,600 jobs can be created. Or, for every $1 billion spent on physical infrastructure projects, 15,800 jobs can be created. For every $1 billion we spend on public services, healthcare, childcare, education, immigration and settlement services, some 20,000 jobs can be created. What do you think will help us best out of this persistent recession/depression? Should we not be advocating with purpose? Imagine the social, economic, and community benefits that we would all reap with a plan that purposely linked community infrastructure with the skill sets of civil engineers, architects, biologists, healthcare workers, social workers, skilled tradespeople, construction workers, who have cut their occupational teeth in some of the most dynamic and bustling places in the Americas, the Middle East, Asia, or Africa, the places where 80% of newcomers come from. Imagine if Thunder Bay conducted an audit of the economic development needs of this community, and maybe you've done that. Imagine if you broke down those needs in terms of what specific occupational skills are needed to realize those needs. Imagine if we compiled an inventory of the skill sets that newcomers have brought with them what would it take for us to match up skill sets with community needs? And naturally, we would need to lobby provincial and federal governments to fund initiatives such as that, where we could put needs, skills, and experience to work in tandem for our communities. I was saying earlier to Kathy, I had to do a presentation for the Liberal Party some months back when Iggy was the boss. And one of the big problems, of course, is that many newcomers face from employers is they don't have Canadian experience. So almost tongue-in-cheek, I suggested that maybe newcomers coming to Canada might do an internship for 6 months or 2 years on an Aboriginal community or First Nations community to get Canadian experience, to find out how Canadians treat the Aboriginal communities in terms of the 633 First Nations, over 200 don't have access to potable water. I would provide you with a different Canadian experience for them. We didn't take the idea seriously. Local immigration partnerships may be one of the ways to see such mutual benefits, and I know you have them. They're comprised of key members and organizations, municipal representatives, employers, school boards, settlement and social service agencies, and I would add unions, workers' associations, and newcomer and diaspora organizations, because together they can develop practical and local strategies to assist with settlement, job creation, and acquiring and sharing relevant work and community experiences. And quite frankly, we also need to be introducing the element of advocacy around comprehensive immigration reform, because what we've been getting ain't what we need. Often newcomers become the magnet for other newcomers who join their predecessors. The first wave often has to struggle with the differences between what they were told and what is the local reality. And we all know that that adjustment period is very difficult. Maybe communities need to think about growing the newcomer resource base that's already here in Thunder Bay, that's made this their home, because they can become the magnet that will grow the community when they recruit members of their diaspora to relocate here. The second wave can benefit from better, more accurate pre-arrival information that's relevant to Thunder Bay. Evidence from Australia and Canada's Immigration Integration Project has proven that those who receive accurate pre-arrival information take less time to settle into a new community. They have fewer difficulties accessing services and entering the labor market. Can Thunder Bay think about establishing Twin City initiatives, if you don't already have them, with sending countries where a growing majority of your newcomers come from? And again, for these measures to work, provincial and federal governments need to support local efforts. And when political parties come knocking and asking for the ethnic vote, we need to ask them, really, what's their serious and authentic commitment that they're going to make to amplify ideas like pre-arrival information measures that can welcome and integrate newcomers for our collective benefit. So, in sum, I see my time has run to a close. I just wanted to wrap up with some ideas to embrace change. We need to confront discrimination and racism. These are tough topics, and many people don't want to have those conversations, but humor is a great way to get people thinking. It's disarming. We need to understand the demographic implications. This is not a charitable action. This is a self-interested action. We need to do the math on the economic losses and gains. You're already established with local immigration partnerships. Connecting with newcomers on their turf, that has been one of the biggest lessons for the Labour movement. We've got to involve all the stakeholders, not these consultations that have been happening on immigration policy. How many of you participated in the online consultations that the federal government has participated? Are those meaningful? I think I remember doing the last one, and there were 15 questions, and 7 were asking who I was. Some people went to some of the face-to-face consultations, and they were asked after they got in the door to leave, and actually they had to return their cookies that were put out on the table. Those are not meaningful consultations. You really should spring for better cookies. What about looking at audits and marrying them with skills inventories? pre-arrival initiatives, and of course, as a union activist, we have to advocate. Newcomers increasingly are going to be determining public policy in Canada. Maybe that's why that document is not secret. If I can close with one last 60-second video. This is what the world might look like in the future.
I need to certify public accountants. What's the marketing consultant? What's the financial officer? Who's in the program? You must speak Java. That's it for today. Gracias.
Over to you.
Any questions or comments, or are we saving it for the afternoon session? No burning questions?
Maybe you'd like to comment on the announcement a couple of days ago about the changes in the Immigration Act, was it? No, the strategy, yeah, there was a federal announcement a couple of days ago.
The one that I can comment on is the regulatory changes to the Foreign Skilled Worker Program.
Yeah.
We're really disappointed with the overall changes of that program. Good on the sense of finally creating a pathway for skills trade people who've been overlooked in the point system process, but that's the only upside of those regulatory changes. The most disturbing changes that are there is, first of all, the Foreign Skilled Worker Program, for those you may know, used to be the major component for our national government to be able to take a look at what are the breadth and depth of skills that we want to build a nation. There used to be 400 specific occupations that were identified that newcomers could say, hey, I've got that. I'm a neurosurgeon. I'm a rock guitarist. I'm a snowboarder. I'm a nurse. And you need me. Or I'm a green engineer. And under this government, that list of 400 was initially reduced to 38 by ministerial instruction, and then further reduced to 29, and 13 of those 29 had caps put on. It used to be that of 250,000 roughly economic immigrants, 170,000 people came through the Foreign Skilled Worker Program. And by CIC's own projections in 2011, that number was going to drop to 18,000. I think the federal government announced this more like around 50,000. But what it has done is this one tool that we had available to us to be able to say, here's where we want to go as a country, has been removed. What's replaced it? In terms of while the overall planning numbers have remained more or less the same, the shift has been to increase things like the Canadian Experience Class Initiative and the provincial nominee programs. Now, our concern about that is, now as a nation and our ability to be able to determine who we wanted based on our economic plan, the PNP and the CEC programs, the people who are the major decision makers there are employers. Now, that's good for employers, but I think nation building is a little bit more than figuring out which economic unit you want in what factory. So that policy shift is a real concern because we've given up a fundamental tool. The second thing in terms of that point system is this tinkering with how many points you're going to allocate for whether or not you have benchmark level 7 in English or French. And not, you actually get penalized if you're bilingual. I'm trying to figure that one out. Okay? Or you get penalized, you get more points if you're younger, and less points if you're older. Well, as Arthur Sweetman, who's one of the academics who was cited in the policy change, said, he couldn't think of a better policy formula to ensure a low-wage environment, because younger people will mean that they have less experience, and then employers will pay them less. There's nothing in that foreign skilled worker program about the hundreds of thousands of newcomers who are here in the country who are in those video spots. Where's the money and the resources and the policy measures that are needed to take highly trained, credentialed people and put them into jobs that we need? In 2007, Minister Finley said that well, first of all, 2005, 2006, the Conservative government went across the country and held roundtables with newcomers and said, you talk, we listen. Great catchline. You talk, we listen. And they heard newcomers say repeatedly, recognize my credentials. 2007, the government promised newcomers that they would put $18 million into a foreign credential recognition office. 6 months later, Ms. Finley said, our hands are tied, it's a bit limited, there's a provincial and regulatory bodies. We're looking into it. 2008, the amount was announced in that budget was going to be $12 million. Never materialized. Instead, what showed up? The Foreign Credential Referral Office, a flaccid shop that a newcomer goes up to, knocks on the door, and gets redirected to one of 400 provincial or regulatory bodies. So what happened there? Politics happened there. One party got an amazing database of newcomers. In 2008, the Building Bridges strategy was unleashed to make connections with the ethnic vote, attend cultural events, show interest, make promises. What actually unfolded? $6.2 million spread over 5 years for the FCRO. And I've been doing some research to actually find out what the actual number is for that office. Wow, it is a labyrinth to actually figure out if that particular shop actually has cash. So to respond to your question, we're missing a huge opportunity with these changes to the foreign skilled worker program. The other aspect is that from a gender perspective, is actually in the document, the government says the trades are primarily male dominated and employers want recent experience, and that's the way it is. It's a male dominated trade. So we're not going to do anything about it. We're going to leave it, it's in this actual statement. How about you give more points to females who have international credentials in the trades to redress a gender imbalance? Rona Ambrose. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm upset about it because it's a huge injustice. You know, we're giving up the foreign skilled worker program to a group that has a right to play a role in immigration policy, but so do others. And I was looking around, what was the last time, what country comes to mind that determined, gave rights to an employer to dictate the economic future of a person? Are you thinking South Africa in the apartheid years? Because that's what it feels like. There's a connection there. It's that extreme. The other thing of that foreign skilled worker program, that focus now on English and French and benchmark level 7, That very clearly means that we're sending the signal that we are shifting our source country supply away from China, India, and Asia, where English and French are not the primary languages, but many people are learning them. And we're shifting back to Europe, where unemployment is through the roof. Who just recently went to a recruitment fair in Ireland? Minister Kennedy, Premier Brad Wall. Who just gave $80,000 to an Irish immigrant settlement center in downtown Toronto? Citizenship and Immigration Canada. This is a very clear signal about where it's a colonial revival of immigration policy. That's got the taint of race to it, to me.
I have a question in terms of, I'm not sure if you had an opportunity to seek out anybody's profile of what services and jobs are here, but what do you feel the next steps that we need to take to address the short-term outcomes currently that we have here, and as well address the long-term outcomes moving forward?
Well, I think that's a great question. I'm going to defer that one to the small group discussion, because I'm more interested in hearing what your ideas are. I put up my last slide, I think, that outlines some ideas of where we need to go. But I'm interested in hearing what you need to be doing in that regard. So if I can, I'm going to defer that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Plucker. I learned a lot of little nuances today, so I'll take that with me and we'll discuss it more after lunch. Let's take a quick, I want to say 5-minute break. You say coffee, bathroom, no time to check the email. My panelists are all here and they're ready, and we're running a little behind schedule. So let's take a quick break, refill, and get back to your tables as soon as possible, and we'll continue with the other part of our program for today.